North East England, the Five Frontiers. Frontier 1, the River Tees. Part 3, Hogbacks, Wapentakes and Odin's Hill. Written and narrated by David Simpson. englandsnortheast.co.uk. In our previous visit to the Tees frontier, we saw how the Viking Eric Bloodaxe met his end on lonely Stainmoor at the instigation of the Earl of Bamborough, who ruled the region to the north of the Tees. We discovered how lands on the north side of the river that had fallen into Viking control were steadily returned to the bishops of Durham by benefactors such as King Canute. Yet much of the territory that later became South Durham in the Tees Valley still shows signs of Viking settlement today. This is particularly evident in its place names. In Teesdale, where there are very few villages, most places retain their Anglo-Saxon names like Middleton and Cutherston, but Viking topographical words such as Force for waterfall, beck for stream, and the dialect word wath meaning ford abound. One Teesdale village with a definite Viking name is Hunderthwaite, the clearing of a Viking called Hunrothra. In 1070, this was the site of a battle involving King Malcolm of Scotland. Lower down the dale, Barnard Castle has Norman origins, but Viking place names hereabouts include Naby, Raby and Rokeby. Further along the Tees, Celeby, Killaby and Ulnaby to the west of Darlington were respectively the farms of the Willow Tree, of Kilvert and Ulfthyn, while Azelby, east of Darlington near Yarm, was Aslak's place. Place names ending in BY are still numerous in Denmark today, being generally lowland settlements, so they are rare in mountainous Norway. In northern England, the BY names, often associated with the Danes, are especially numerous across the Tees in Yorkshire. Downstream from Azelby, as the Tees widens, bynames are absent north of the river, but a handful of Thorpe names near Hartlepool occur as far north as Little Thorpe near Easington. Thorpes were secondary settlements of the Viking era, often attached to a larger estate. The area around Hartlepool is also noted for Grimston hybrid names, where a Viking personal name was added to the Anglo-Saxon word tun or tun in the old tongue, meaning farm or village. Grimston names may reflect a Viking takeover of Anglo-Saxon estates. Here, Vikings called Aemunda, Swine, Blekir and Thor are remembered at Amerston, Swainston, Blakeston and Throston. Carlton, near Stockton, was a Viking peasant's farm, while Sheraton, near the busy A19, was seemingly named from Skirfer, a Viking with flaky skin. This village later gave its name to the Sheraton family, whose members have included Thomas Sheraton, the Stockton-born furniture designer. Only a thin scattering of Viking place names can be found north of the Tees Valley. The River Skern, which joins the Tees near Darlington, is a Viking name. In its upper reaches, in marshy Carrs near Ferry Hill, it almost merges with Croxdale and Tursdale becks, both tributaries of the River Wear. Croxdale and Tursdale both belonged to Vikings called Croc and Thrall, while nearby Thrislington was the farm of Thorstein. Even Durham City, originally Dunholm or Hill Island, is part Norse. Holm, Holm, is a Viking word for an island. North of Durham, however, and beyond towards the Tyne and into Northumberland, Viking place names are very rare. Southwest of Durham City, near Bishop Auckland, is the River Gaunless, a weir tributary that derives from an old word for useless or gainless. It is the most northeasterly Viking river name in England. The section of the River Wear around Bishop Auckland is fed, like the Tees, by becks in Viking style, but in Upper Weardale beyond Frosterley and between Durham and Sunderland, streams are called burns in Anglo-Scottish style. Streams joining the Tyne are likewise called burns, but not a single burn joins the River Tees directly. We know that lands in the Tees Valley of South Durham were seized by Vikings and later returned to the bishops of Durham. But even after the Norman conquest, there were still lands immediately north of the Tees that were not yet to become part of County Durham, in what was called the Wapentake of Sadberge. A wapentake, or Wapentak, from the brandishing of weapons at an assembly, was a medieval administrative division of Viking origin, common in Yorkshire and Danelaw, England. Sadberge, with a Norse name meaning flat-topped hill, encompassed scattered lands from Teesdale to Hartlepool, centred on Sadberge itself, a village just off the A66 between Darlington and Stockton, where views stretch west to Barnard Castle. It was the only wapentake in the northeastern region north of the River Tees. Seemingly and confusingly, in the years after the Norman conquest, it formed an outlying part of Northumberland, not included in County Durham until purchased by Bishop Pudsey from Richard I in 1189. Indeed, for centuries there were still references to the counties of Durham and Sadberge. A plaque on a curious stone on Sadberge village green proclaims Queen Victoria, Empress of India and Countess of Sadberge. Despite its location, the wapentake did not include Stockton or Darlington, but we know that it included Hartlepool, Hart, Greetham, Stranton, Elwick, Stainton near Sedgefield, Elton, Long Newton, Egglescliffe, Middleton St George, Low Dinsdale, Cotham Munderville, Coniscliffe, and the extensive barony of Gainford in Teesdale. None of these places were included in Durham's equivalent of the Domesday Book, the Bolden Book of 1183, as this was surveyed before they were purchased by Bishop Pudsey. As we progress down the valley, Viking place names on the Yorkshire side of the River Tees are very high indeed, even compared to other parts of Yorkshire. This is especially apparent in the Cleveland district, which has one of the highest densities of Viking parish names in the country. Village names ending in BY are especially notable around Middlesbrough, where many settlements were later swallowed up as Teesside suburbs. Thornaby, Maltby, Ormsby, Tollersby, Lackenby, Lazenby and Normanby, to name a few, remember the names of Thormoth, Malty, Orm, Toll, Lacan, and a freeman or leasinger. Interestingly, a Northman or Norwegian gave his name to Normanby, in what was probably mostly Danish territory. Cleveland is an ancient district of Yorkshire, featuring coastal cliffs and the Cleveland Hills on the northern edge of the North York Moors. Also anciently called the Wapentake of Langbar, Cleveland must not be confused with the short-lived county of Cleveland, 1974 to 1996, that mistakenly included Stockton, Billingham and Hartlepool from the Durham side of the river. The most prominent natural landmark in Cleveland is Roseberry Topping, which has Viking links. Visible from miles around, the hill offers superb views across the countryside of the Lower Tees Valley, encompassing the impressive industrial landscape of Teesside and the beautiful rural scenery of this most northeasterly corner of Yorkshire. Roseberry Topping was originally Odin's Berge, or Odin's Hill, from the Norse god that the Anglo-Saxons called Woden. It was likely a place of pagan worship for the Vikings before they were Christianized. Of course, the famed explorer Captain James Cook, born at Marton in Cleveland in 1728 near Middlesbrough, was raised on a farm at the foot of Roseberry Topping. Perhaps as a boy he gazed out to sea from its majestic summit. Much evidence for Viking settlement on the Tees frontier comes from place names and a handful of early records that are mostly associated with the writings of the church. The Tees was clearly a Viking frontier which isolated the remaining region of Northumbria to the north. But the process and timeline of how this came about is not clear. It may be significant that the settlement of the itinerant community of wandering Lindisfarne monks of St Cuthbert at Conecaster, or Chesterley Street as we call it today, that later moved to Durham, was instigated with a grant of land from Guthred, a Norse king of York, in AD 883. What we now call County Durham really began with the settlement of this influential group of monks, and Durham developed as a buffer zone or cross-cultural region sandwiched between Anglian Northumberland to the north and Danish-settled Yorkshire to the south. Perhaps the formation of County Durham, facing a Viking frontier at the Tees, was due to Viking political expedience. Interestingly, the eventual flight of the Cuthbert community of monks from Conecaster, that is so often attributed to a Viking threat, was more likely due to the danger of Scottish raids that were particularly prevalent at the time. Sadly, there are no records of the Viking raids or battles that resulted in the Viking seizure of lands in the Tees Valley, but it's unlikely that their conquest and colonisation was completely peaceful. We know the very last Viking attack on the north came in 1153, when King Eystein of Norway raided Hartlepool, Whitby and Scarborough, and we know the first mention of Cleveland, or Cliffland, is in the Viking Orkney Inga saga, but this was not compiled until the 13th century, long after the Tees was settled by the Vikings. The Viking colonisation of the Tees Valley probably began shortly after the Danish conquest of Yorkshire in AD 866. However, other than the recorded grant of land to Skula at Billingham by King Ragnald of Dublin in AD 918, little is known about the timeline of Viking settlement along the Tees. Billingham was later returned to the bishops of Durham. The lovely hilltop tower of the Little Saxon Church at Billingham Village, with its views of neighbouring chemical works in the valley below, actually dates to the 10th century. It is dedicated to St Cuthbert. Incidentally, School Aycliffe, north of Darlington, is named from a Viking called Skula, perhaps the same man who seized Billingham. It is certainly named from a person rather than a place of education. There are no great archaeological finds providing clues to the settlement of the Vikings along the Tees, but one tantalising part of the story is the wealth of intriguing Viking sculptures called Hogbacks. These unique and fascinating tomb-sized Viking works of art crop up sporadically across the north. A couple have been found on the Wirral on Merseyside, a major area of Dublin Norse settlement. A handful have been found in York, and a smattering in the Eden Valley of Cumbria and the Cumbrian coast, as well as here and there in Scotland. They crop up in Rydale, south of the North York Moors, in village churches, in single incidences, and around 14 have been found along the Cleveland coast. However, the real hogback heartland is a relatively small area stretching from North Allerton to the Tees at Sockburn and Gainford. Carved in the form of a longhouse, the shape of a hog's back, these wonderful sculptured stones might feature bears clutching the end pieces. Usually found at churches or important Christian sites, 10 have been found at Brompton Church near North Allerton, 4 at Gainford west of Darlington, 3 at Wycliffe-on-Tees and 5 at Craythorne near Yarm. Others in the area have been found at Stanwick, Gilling West, Stainton in Yorkshire, Dinsdale, Ingleby Arncliffe, Kirby Wisk, Beedale, Pickhill and North Allerton. Several hogbacks from North Yorkshire and the Tees Valley can be seen in the remarkable collection of Anglo-Saxon and Viking Age sculptures at Durham Cathedral. Hogbacks represent a fusion of Christian and pagan Viking styles as Viking settlers became increasingly Christianised. But why they are so heavily focused along the Middle Tees and in the neighbouring Wapentake of Allertonshire is not clear. Perhaps they mark the gateway to the sacred lands of St. Cuthbert to the north. They are one of the great mysteries of the Tees Valley's Viking heritage. In the fourth and final exploration of the frontier of the Tees, we find a helmet, a centuries-old sword, a fearsome worm or wyvern winding and weaving its way into English literary history, and all within a couple of loops of the snaking serpent-like Tees. We also look at the lexical legacy of how Viking speech has enriched the English language.